The sound of the slap didn't just echo through the room, it shattered the silence of New York's most exclusive restaurant. Julian Thorne, a tech billionaire worth billions, stood over a trembling 22-year-old waitress, his hand still raised, screaming that she was nothing but a gutter rat thief. He thought he had just disciplined a nobody. He thought his money made him untouchable. But when that crying waitress wiped the blood from her lip and pulled out her cracked iPhone to make one phone call, Julian Thorne didn't realize he had just signed his own death warrant. He froze, not because of the police, but because of the name she whispered into the receiver. This is the story of how arrogance destroyed an empire in 60 minutes. The Obsidian Club in Manhattan was the kind of place where the air smelled of old money, truffles, and quiet desperation. To get a table here, you didn't just need a reservation. You needed a lineage. The walls were lined with dark mahogany, the chandeliers dripped with Austrian crystal, and the staff were trained to be seen, never heard, and mostly invisible. Emma Vance was good at being invisible. At 22, with her messy chestnut hair pulled back into a severe bun and a uniform that was 2 sizes too big, she blended into the shadows of the dining room perfectly. She moved with the silent grace of someone who spent a lifetime trying not to take up space. To the patrons of the Obsidian, she wasn't a person with dreams, a history, or a heartbeat. She was a pair of hands that refilled water glasses and replaced silverware. That was exactly how Emma liked it. Table 4 needs a refresh on the Bollinger, Marcus Sterling, the floor manager, hissed into her ear as he breezed past. Sterling was a man whose entire personality was built around the size of his tips and the curvature of his spine when he bowed to celebrities. "And fix your apron, Vance. You look like you slept in a dumpster." "Yes, Mr. Sterling," Emma whispered, head down, adjusting the starch-stiff fabric. She picked up the silver bucket and made her way toward table 4. It was the prime spot, the power table, situated in the center of the room, but elevated slightly on a dais, giving the occupants a view of the peasants below. Tonight, table 4 belonged to Julian Thorne. If you lived in the Western Hemisphere and owned a smartphone, you knew Julian Thorne. He was the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, a man who had revolutionized data mining. He was 35, handsome in a shark-like way, with teeth that were too white and eyes that were too empty. He was currently worth $42 billion, and judging by the volume of his voice, he wanted every person in the 121 zip code to know it. He was dining with 2 nervous-looking venture capitalists and a woman who looked more like a sculpted aesthetic than a human being. "So I told the senator," Julian boomed, leaning back and resting his handmade Italian loafers on the rung of the empty chair next to him. "If you want the algorithm to predict the election, you don't ask me nicely. You buy the premium package. I don't get out of bed for less than 9 figures." The table erupted in sycophantic laughter. Emma approached silently, waiting for a break in the conversation to pour the champagne. She knew the drill. Never interrupt the client, pour from the right, twist the bottle to prevent the drip. As she reached over to refill Julian's flute, the billionaire made a sudden, expansive gesture with his hand, knocking into Emma's arm. A splash of champagne, expensive, vintage Bollinger, sloshed over the rim and landed on the sleeve of Julian's midnight blue Tom Ford suit. The restaurant went silent. It was as if someone had sucked the oxygen out of the room. Emma froze. The bottle felt like lead in her hand. I am so sorry, sir," she stammered, instantly reaching for the linen napkin on her forearm to dab at the droplets. Julian Thorne stared at the wet spot on his cuff for 3 agonizing seconds. Then he looked up at Emma. His eyes weren't angry. They were amused, which was infinitely worse. It was the look a child gives an ant before magnifying the sun onto it. "Sorry?" Julian repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "You're sorry? This suit costs more than your entire bloodline will earn in a century." He bumped my arm, sir. But I will get club soda immediately. It will come right out." Emma tried to explain, her voice trembling. "He bumped your arm?" Julian turned to his guests, a mock look of shock on his face. "Did you hear that? I bumped her arm. The incompetence is staggering, Sterling." Marcus Sterling materialized out of thin air, looking pale. "Mr. Thorne, my deepest apologies. Is there an issue?" "Get this creature out of my sight," Julian waved a hand dismissively. "And bring me a fresh bottle. This one is tainted by stupidity." "Immediately, sir." "Vance, get to the kitchen," Sterling hissed. Emma retreated, her face burning with humiliation. She could feel the eyes of the entire room boring into her back. She rushed to the kitchen, fighting back tears. She needed this job. She needed the tips. She had rent to pay in a shoebox apartment in Queens, and she was saving for something important. She couldn't lose this. 20 minutes passed. Emma was relegated to polishing silverware in the back, hidden from view. But the restaurant was understaffed that night. When the rush hit at 8:30 p.m., Sterling grabbed her by the shoulder. "I have no choice," he gritted out. "Go bus table 4. They're finished with the main course. Do not speak. Do not look him in the eye. Clear the plates and vanish. If you mess this up, Vance, you're blacklisted in this city." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. She could do this. She just had to be a ghost. She returned to the dining room. Julian Thorne was now deep in his cups, his tie loosened, his face flushed with wine and arrogance. He was laughing loudly at a joke one of the venture capitalists had made. Emma moved quickly. She stacked the dinner plates, cleared the bread basket, and wiped the crumbs. She was efficient, silent. She was almost done. As she reached for the final charger plate, she noticed Julian had taken off his watch, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. It was sitting on the tablecloth, a heavy, intricate piece of machinery worth more than most mansions. She carefully wiped around it, terrified to even breathe on it. She finished clearing the table and turned to leave with her heavy tray. "Wait." The voice stopped her cold. It wasn't loud this time. It was sharp. Emma turned. Julian Thorne was standing up. He was looking at the table. Then he looked at Emma. Then he looked at the table again. "Where is it?" Julian asked. Emma blinked, confused. "Sir?" "My watch," Julian said, his voice rising in pitch. "My Patek. I took it off because the band was tight. It was right there, next to the wine glass. You just wiped the table." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at the table. The spot where the watch had been was empty. I didn't touch it, sir. I just cleared the plates," Emma said, her voice shaking. "Don't lie to me." Julian slammed his hand on the table, causing the crystal glasses to jump. The entire restaurant fell silent again. This time the silence was heavy with dread. "It was there. You came over. Now it's gone. You're the only one who touched the table." "I swear I didn't take it," Emma pleaded, clutching her tray. "Maybe it fell. Maybe it's in your pocket." "You think I'm drunk?" Julian stepped around the table, closing the distance between them. He was a large man, over 6 feet tall, and he loomed over her petite frame. "You think I don't know where I put a $3 million timepiece? You stole it. I saw you looking at it earlier. I saw the greed in your eyes." "I didn't. Please check the tray, check my pockets." Emma was crying now, the tears spilling over hot and fast. "Oh, we will check everything," Julian sneered. He turned to the room, addressing the other diners like an actor on a stage. "This is what happens when you let the riffraff into establishments like this. They think they can take what belongs to their betters. Marcus Sterling came running, sweating profusely. Mr. Thorne, please, let's handle this in the office. No, Julian roared. We handle this here. This little thief stole my property. I want it back, and I want her in handcuffs. He turned back to Emma, his face twisted with rage. Give it to me, now! I don't have it, Emma sobbed. Julian Thorne, the man who was on the cover of Forbes, the man who claimed to be a visionary, lost all control. Fueled by alcohol and an unchecked ego, he pulled his hand back. Crack! The slap was vicious. It caught Emma on the cheekbone, the force of it spinning her around. She dropped the heavy tray, plates shattered on the marble floor, silverware scattered with a deafening clatter. Emma fell to her knees, clutching her face, shock radiating through her body. The restaurant gasped. A few chairs scraped back, but no one moved to help. The power dynamic was too terrifying. Julian stood over her, breathing heavily, adjusting his cufflinks. Don't you play the victim with me? He spat. You're a thief! A dirty little gutter rat thief! For a long moment, the only sound in the Obsidian Club was the soft sobbing of Emma Vance and the buzzing of the ambient electronic music that felt jarringly cheerful against the violence that had just occurred. Emma tasted copper. Her lip was split. Her cheek felt like it was on fire. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the burning shame. She was on her knees in the middle of a room full of the city's elite, surrounded by broken porcelain and remnants of lobster bisque. She looked up through her tears. She saw faces turned away, people pretending to inspect their wine or their phones. They saw it happen. They knew he was wrong, or at least they knew a man shouldn't strike a woman. But nobody wanted to cross Julian Thorne. His lawyers could destroy a person's life before breakfast. Marcus Sterling, the manager, looked at Emma with a mixture of pity and terror. But terror won. He looked at Julian. Mr. Thorne, I will call the police immediately, Sterling stammered. Police? Yes, but not before we find my watch, Julian growled. He looked down at Emma. Empty your pockets. Now. Or do I need to have my security detail strip search you right here? Emma's eyes went wide. The humiliation was total. I didn't take it, she whispered, her voice broken. Please, Mr. Sterling, you know me. I've worked here for 6 months. I've never taken a sugar packet. Be quiet, Vance, Sterling snapped, though his voice wavered. Just turn out your pockets. Let's resolve this. With trembling hands, Emma reached into her apron. She pulled out a notepad, a cheap ballpoint pen, and a wine key. She turned the pockets inside out. Nothing. She reached into her skirt pockets. A few coins, a hair tie, nothing. Check her socks, check her bra, Julian demanded, his eyes manic. She probably dropped it in the trash when she realized she was caught. That is enough. The voice came from table 7. An older gentleman with silver hair stood up. You struck the girl, Thorne. That's assault. The watch isn't on her. Let the police handle it. Julian whipped around, his eyes narrowing. Sit down, old man. Unless you want Thorne Dynamics to buy your little firm and liquidate it by noon tomorrow, this doesn't concern you. The older man hesitated. He looked at his wife, who looked terrified. Slowly, shamefully, he sat back down. Julian smirked. He had won. He always won. He turned back to Emma. You see? No one is coming to save you, because you are nobody. You are a thief who got caught. Emma wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. Something in her shifted. The fear was still there, paralyzing and cold, but beneath it, a spark of something else began to burn. Anger. She wasn't a thief. She was working this job to understand the world, to see how people lived, to learn the value of $1 before she took on the responsibilities that awaited her. She had endured the long hours, the aching feet, and the rude customers because she wanted to be humble. But there was nothing humble about being abused by a bully. Slowly, Emma stood up. She was short, barely 5'4", but she stood straight. She looked Julian Thorne in the eye. "I did not steal your watch," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. "And you made a mistake, touching me." Julian laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "A mistake? The only mistake was your mother not swallowing you. You're fired. Sterling, she's fired, right?" "Yes, of course," Sterling said quickly. "Vance, gather your things and wait in the office for the police." "No," Emma said. "Excuse me?" Julian stepped closer, invading her personal space again. "I said no," Emma repeated. "I'm not going to the office, and I'm not leaving until I get an apology." Julian stared at her, genuinely baffled. "An apology? From me? To you?" He looked around the room, grinning. "She wants an apology. Listen to this delusion." He leaned in close to her ear, his breath smelling of stale wine. "I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to make sure you get a felony record. You'll never work in this town again. You'll be lucky to scrub toilets in a prison cell." Emma didn't flinch this time. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out her phone. It was an old model, the screen cracked in the corner. "Who are you calling?" Julian mocked. "Your boyfriend? Some other waiter who can come and wipe your tears?" "No," Emma said, unlocking the screen. Her fingers hovered over the contacts. She only had a few numbers saved. She scrolled to the bottom, to a contact simply labeled Father. She hadn't called this number in 2 years. She had left home to prove she could make it on her own, to escape the immense shadow of her family name. They had parted on difficult terms. He had told her, "The world is a shark tank, Emma. When you realize you're not a shark, you'll come back." She hated that he was right. She wasn't a shark, but she knew one. The biggest shark in the ocean. "I'm calling my father," Emma said softly. Julian burst into laughter again. "Daddy? You're calling Daddy? What's he going to do? Come down here in his beat-up Toyota and yell at me?" Emma pressed the call button. She put the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and instantly alert. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms across 3 continents. "Papa?" Emma said, her voice cracking for the first time since she stood up. "Emma." The tone on the other end shifted from commanding to concerned in a millisecond. "Emma, is that you? Are you okay?" "No, Papa," she said, looking straight into Julian Thorne's arrogant eyes. "I'm at work, at the Obsidian. A man just slapped me in the face." There was a silence on the line. It was a terrifying silence. It was the sound of a glacier cracking. "Who?" her father asked. One word. No inflection. Just pure, cold danger. "Julian Thorne," Emma said clearly, so the whole room could hear. "He accused me of stealing his watch. He hit me, Papa. He made me bleed." Julian rolled his eyes, crossing his arms. "Tell him I'll sue him too, if he bothers me." "Put him on the speaker," her father said. Emma pulled the phone away and pressed the speaker button. She held it out toward Julian. "My father wants to speak to you," she said. Julian scoffed. He leaned toward the cracked phone in Emma's hand. "Listen here, whoever you are. Your daughter is a thief and a liar. I'm doing you a favor by teaching her a lesson. If you know what's good for you, you'll tell her to cooperate with the police before I decide to bankrupt your entire family for wasting my time." There was a pause. The static of the line hissed. Then, the voice came through the tiny speaker, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Thorne, this is Magnus Vance." The color drained from Julian Thorne's face, faster than the champagne had spilled from the bottle. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Magnus Vance. The room seemed to tilt. Everyone knew the name. Magnus Vance wasn't just a billionaire. He was the bedrock of the economy. He owned the banks that lent Julian money. He owned the media conglomerate that ran Julian's ads. He owned the very building the Obsidian Club was located in. He was the kind of wealth that whispered, while Julian was the kind that screamed. Magnus, Julian stammered, his arrogance evaporating into a puddle of sweat. Mr. Vance, I didn't know. You struck my daughter. Magnus Vance's voice was calm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. You put your hands on my flesh and blood. Mr. Vance, there's been a misunderstanding. Julian's voice went up an octave. He looked at Emma with horror. The gutter rat was the daughter of the most powerful man in New York. She was working as a waitress. I didn't know. I thought... You thought she was powerless, Magnus said. You thought she was someone you could break. The watch, Julian cried out, desperate for a lifeline. She stole my Patek Philippe. It's gone. That's why I was upset. Stay right there, Thorne, Magnus said. If you move 1 inch, if you even look at her again, I will burn your world to the ground. I am 10 minutes away. The line went dead. The phone call ended, but the echo of Magnus Vance's voice seemed to vibrate in the crystal glasses on the tables. The atmosphere in the Obsidian Club underwent a grotesque transformation. Moments ago, it had been a theatre of cruelty where the rich laughed at the poor. Now it was a cage, and Julian Thorne, the apex predator, had just realized he was locked in with something much bigger than himself. Julian stared at the phone in Emma's hand as if it were a bomb. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, for the first time. He searched for the signs he had missed. The posture? No, she slouched. The clothes? Cheap uniform. But the eyes? Yes, beneath the fear and the tears there was a steeliness he hadn't recognized. It was the same steeliness he had seen across negotiation tables from Magnus Vance. Emma, Julian breathed, his voice cracking. He took a step toward her, hands raised in a placating gesture. Emma, please, I had no idea. Why didn't you say something? Why were you serving food? Emma stepped back, flinching. She held her cheek where a dark bruise was already blooming, violet against her pale skin. She didn't answer him. She didn't owe him an explanation of why she wanted to build a life outside her father's shadow. Mr. Sterling, Julian barked, spinning around to find the manager. Get her ice, get her a chair. Why is she standing? Do you want her to faint? Marcus Sterling, who looked as if he might faint himself, scrambled. Yes, right away. Someone bring a chair. Ice. Now. The staff, previously frozen, burst into chaotic motion. A velvet chair was dragged from a nearby table. A silver ice bucket, usually reserved for the Dom Perignon, was emptied, filled with fresh ice, and wrapped in the finest linen napkin. Here, please, sit, Julian said, trying to guide her. Don't touch me, Emma said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it stopped him dead. She sat down, not because he told her to, but because her legs were shaking so badly she couldn't hold herself up. She pressed the cold cloth to her face, wincing. Julian wiped sweat from his forehead. He turned to his guests, the two VOAs and the sculpted woman. They were staring at him with a mixture of horror and calculation. They knew what Magnus Vance could do. Magnus could freeze assets. He could blacklist companies. He could make stock prices plummet with a single tweet. Being associated with Julian Thorne right now was toxic. I have to go, one of the venture capitalists said, standing up abruptly. My, wife. Emergency. Sit down, Frank, Julian hissed. If you leave me now, the deal is off." "The deal is dead, Julian," Frank said, throwing his napkin on the table. "You just assaulted Magnus Vance's daughter. Thorn Dynamics stock is going to be trading for pennies by tomorrow morning. I'm not going down with you." He walked out. The other VC followed. Only the woman remained, looking nervous, clutching her clutch bag tightly in her lap. Julian was hyperventilating. He turned back to Emma. "Look, we can fix this. I can fix this. How much? $1 million? $5 million? I'll write a check right now. We tell your father it was a misunderstanding. We tell him you tripped. Yes, you tripped and fell, and I was helping you up." Emma looked at him with pure disgust. "You think you can buy my father? Everyone has a price," Julian screamed, his composure shattering completely. "I am Julian Thorn. I am the future." "You are the past," Emma said softly. The minutes ticked by like hours. Every time the heavy oak doors of the restaurant opened, Julian flinched. The other diners were glued to their seats. Nobody was eating. The chef had stopped cooking. The entire ecosystem of the restaurant was suspended in terror. At the 8-minute mark, Julian started pacing. He pulled at his collar. "He's bluffing. He's not coming. He's probably in London. Or Tokyo. He just said that to scare me." He looked at the empty spot on the table where his watch had been. "And the watch? You still have the watch. That's the leverage. Even if he comes, you're still a thief. He can't change the law. Theft is theft." He was trying to convince himself. He was desperate to find a narrative where he wasn't the villain, where he wasn't doomed. "I didn't take your watch," Emma said tiredly. "Then where is it?" Julian yelled, kicking the table leg. Boom. The double doors of the Obsidian Club didn't just open. They were thrown wide with such force that they hit the stoppers with a thunderous clap. The silence in the room broke. 2 men in dark suits entered first. They were massive, efficient, and scanned the room with professional paranoia. They were private security, the kind that operated above the law. Then Magnus Vance walked in. He was 60 years old, but he moved with the kinetic energy of a heavyweight boxer. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a suit that cost more than the restaurant's monthly revenue. His hair was silver, swept back, and his face was etched with lines of hard decisions and ruthless victories. But his eyes, usually cold blue steel, were currently burning with a father's rage. He didn't look at the staff. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at Julian. He walked straight to the center of the room, to the velvet chair where the girl in the oversized waitress uniform sat, holding ice to her face. "Emma," he said. His voice wasn't the booming voice from the phone. It was soft, almost broken. Emma looked up, tears spilling fresh. "Papa." Magnus knelt. It was a sight that would be talked about in New York society for decades. Magnus Vance, the Iron King, kneeling on a restaurant floor. He gently took her hand and pulled the napkin away from her face. When he saw the bruise, purple, swollen and angry against her cheekbone, and the cut on her lip, his jaw tightened so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling deeply, composing himself. If he didn't, he might have killed a man with his bare hands right there. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I failed. I tried to make it on my own, but I—" "Shh!" Magnus silenced her, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "You didn't fail. You survived. There is no shame in calling for the cavalry when you're facing a monster." He stood up. He helped Emma to her feet, keeping a protective arm around her shoulders. He handed her to one of the security guards. "Take her to the car. Get Dr. Harris on the phone. I want her checked for a concussion immediately." "Yes, Mr. Vance," the guard said, gently guiding Emma away. "Papa, wait," Emma said, turning back. The watch. He said I stole his watch. Magnus didn't turn to her. He kept his eyes fixed on Julian Thorne. Go, Emma. I will handle the watch. I will handle everything. Emma left. The doors closed behind her. Now it was just Magnus Vance and Julian Thorne. Julian was standing by table 4, trembling. He tried to smile. It was a ghastly, skeletal thing. Magnus. Mr. Vance, it's an honor. I think emotions ran high tonight. I didn't know it was your daughter. If I had known. Magnus walked toward him. The sound of his dress shoes on the marble was rhythmic, deliberate. He stopped 3 feet away. If you had known she was my daughter, you would have treated her with respect, Magnus said calmly. Which means you treat people based on who owns them, not who they are. You treat the powerful with reverence, and the weak with violence. She was insolent, Julian blurted out, panic making him stupid. And she stole my Patek Philippe. It's a Grandmaster chime. It's gone. Magnus looked at the table. He looked at the disarray. Then he looked at Julian. You think my daughter, who has a trust fund that could buy Switzerland, stole your watch? Maybe for the thrill, Julian argued. Rich kids do that. Kleptomania, it's a thing. Magnus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Julian, you are currently leveraged at 15-1 on your new AI project. Your loans are held by Vanguard Capital. Do you know who owns the controlling interest in Vanguard? Julian paled. No, that's a public. I do, Magnus said. I own your debt, Julian. I own your building. I own the servers your revolutionary code runs on. He took a step closer. I could bankrupt you by making a phone call. I could have you arrested for assault. I could bury you in lawsuits until your great-grandchildren are born in debt. But I want to know one thing first. Magnus turned his gaze to the woman sitting at the table, Julian's date. She had been perfectly still this entire time, trying to blend into the upholstery. You, Magnus said, stand up. The woman, a model named Chloe, stood up shakily. I didn't do anything. Magnus pointed to her clutch bag. It was a small, silver designer bag. Open it. What? Chloe gasped. This is private property. Open it! Magnus roared, his voice finally rising to a thunderclap that shook the walls. Chloe sobbed, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. She opened the bag. Magnus reached in. He didn't pull out lipstick. He didn't pull out a phone. He pulled out a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. The room gasped. Julian Thorne looked at the watch, then at Chloe, his eyes bulging out of his head. Chloe, Julian whispered. You. I'm sorry, Chloe wailed. You said you were going to dump me. You said you were bored. I needed insurance. It was just sitting there. Magnus dangled the watch in the air, the $3 million object that had caused a young girl to be beaten and humiliated. She didn't steal it, Magnus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. The staff didn't steal it. Your own greed and the company you keep stole it. He tossed the watch onto the table. It hit the porcelain plate with a heavy thud, cracking the crystal face. Julian stared at the broken watch. He looked at Magnus. Mr. Vance. Please. I didn't know. The woman, she took it. It wasn't my fault. You struck my child, Magnus said, because you were lazy, because you were careless, and because you are a bully. Magnus pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. Execute Order 66 on Thorne Dynamics, Magnus said into the phone. Pull the credit lines, call in the loans, and release the statement to the press that we are severing all ties due to ethical misconduct and criminal assault by the CEO. No, Julian screamed, falling to his knees. No, you can't. That will kill the IPO. That will destroy everything. Magnus looked down at the man on the floor. You slapped a waitress because you thought she was nobody. You forgot the first rule of power, Julian. Magnus leaned down, his face inches from Julian's. You never know who is standing in the shadows. The fall of a titan is rarely silent. Usually, it is a slow crumbling of assets and reputation over years. But for Julian Thorne, the destruction was vertical, instantaneous, and televised. By the time the police arrived at the Obsidian Club to drag a weeping, protesting Julian out in handcuffs, the video footage from the restaurant's security cameras had already been secured by Magnus Vance's private team. Within an hour, a leaked clip, showing only the slap and Julian's subsequent tirade, was trending #1 globally on X, formerly Twitter. The headline was simple and devastating. Tech billionaire assaults waitress Overwatch, he lost. Julian spent the night in a holding cell at the 19th precinct. He sat on a metal bench, still wearing his ruined Tom Ford suit, smelling of dried champagne and fear. He kept demanding to see his lawyers, screaming that he was a victim of entrapment, that Chloe was the thief, that Magnus Vance was orchestrating a conspiracy. But when his lawyer, a shark named Arthur Pendleton, who charged $2,000 an hour, finally arrived at 4:10 a.m., he didn't look ready to fight. He looked like he was attending a funeral. "Get me out of here, Arthur," Julian hissed, gripping the bars. "Sue them, sue the city, sue Vance for defamation." Arthur sighed, placing his briefcase on the table. He didn't sit down. "Julian, shut up." Julian blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" I said, "Shut up. There is no suing Vance. Do you know what happened while you were in here?" Arthur pulled out a tablet and held it up. The screen showed a stock ticker. THRN, Thorne Dynamics, 82%. The market opened in pre-trading in London and Hong Kong, Arthur explained, his voice devoid of sympathy. Vance's banks called in your loans at midnight. They cited the moral turpitude clause in your lending agreements. You are in default. To cover the debt, they are liquidating your assets. The board of directors held an emergency meeting via Zoom 20 minutes ago. You have been voted out as CEO, effective immediately. "They can't do that!" Julian shrieked. "I founded the company. It's mine." "It was yours," Arthur corrected. "Now it belongs to the creditors. Specifically, it belongs to a holding company called Vengeance LLC, which was incorporated 3 hours ago. Take a wild guess who owns it." Julian slumped against the cold concrete wall. Magnus Vance hadn't just beaten him. He had eaten him alive. Meanwhile, across the city, in a penthouse suite at the St. Regis, the atmosphere was quiet, sterile, and safe. Emma sat on a plush sofa, a heavy blanket wrapped around her. Her cheek was bandaged, and her lip was stitched. She held a cup of tea with both hands, staring out at the skyline. Magnus Vance sat in the armchair opposite her. He looked older tonight. The rage had burned off, leaving behind a weary sadness. "I hated seeing you like that," Magnus said quietly, "in that uniform, serving men like him." "I liked the work, Papa," Emma said softly, not looking at him. "Not the abuse, but the work. It felt real. Nobody knew my name. Nobody cared about the trust fund. If I dropped a plate, I was clumsy. If I did a good job, I got a tip. It was honest." Magnus nodded slowly. "I know. I tried to protect you from the shark tank, and you jumped into the ocean to prove you could swim. I respect that, Emma. More than you know." He leaned forward. "But there is a difference between being humble and being defenseless. Tonight, you were defenseless. That is my failure, not yours." Emma looked at him. "What happens to him? Julian?" "He is being erased," Magnus said simply. "By next week, he will be a footnote in a business ethics textbook. A warning story." "I don't want revenge," Emma said, her voice trembling. "I just want him to know that I'm a person, that we're all people. He knows now, Magnus said grimly. But Emma, you cannot go back to the obsidian. You cannot go back to being invisible. The world knows who you are now. The video is everywhere. Emma closed her eyes. Her experiment in anonymity was over. The bubble had popped. So what do I do? She asked. Magnus smiled, a genuine warm smile. You take your seat at the table, not as my daughter, but as the woman who stood up to a bully and won. Come work with me. Not for me. With me. Run the charitable foundation or the media arm. Use that empathy you learned waiting tables. The company needs a heart, Emma. I've been the brain and the fist for too long. Emma thought about it. She thought about the other waitresses, the bus boys, the people Sterling yelled at daily. She thought about the invisible people. Okay, she whispered, but on one condition. Anything. We buy the Obsidian Club, she said. Magnus raised an eyebrow. And do what with it? Burn it down? No, Emma said, a small mischievous smile touching her bruised lips. I want to fire Marcus Sterling, and I want to change the dress code. 3 weeks later. New York moves fast. The scandal of Julian Thorne had already been replaced by a politician's affair in the news cycle, but the wreckage of his life was still smoking. Julian sat in a small, cramped lawyer's office in Queens. He couldn't afford Arthur Pendleton anymore. He was now represented by a court-appointed public defender named Gary, who had mustard on his tie and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Julian looked like a ghost. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair was unkempt. The Tom Ford suits had been seized by the IRS. He was wearing a generic button-down shirt from a department store. Okay, here's the deal, Gary said, shuffling through papers. The district attorney is offering a plea, assault in the 3rd degree, 2 years probation, massive community service, and mandatory anger management classes, plus restitution. I'm not pleading guilty. Julian slammed his hand on the cheap laminate desk. I was provoked. It was a setup. Mr. Thorne, please, Gary sighed. They have video of you slapping a 100-pound girl. They have video of you screaming racial and classist slurs. If we go to trial, the jury will crucify you. You'll do jail time, real jail time. Rikers Island. The mention of Rikers silenced Julian. He had spent 1 night in a holding cell and had nearly lost his mind. He couldn't survive prison. Fine, Julian muttered. I'll take the probation. Good, Gary said. Now, there is one more thing. The civil suit. Civil suit? Julian's head snapped up. I thought Vance wasn't suing. He's not, Gary said. Emma Vance is suing, but it's a settlement offer. She wants to meet. She wants to meet me? Julian frowned. Why? To gloat? I don't know, Gary said. But her lawyers said, if you agree to the meeting and sign the papers, she will drop the civil claim for emotional damages, which is good, because you have no money left to pay it. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. The location was ironic. The Obsidian Club. Julian walked up the steps. The place looked different. The heavy, intimidating velvet curtains were gone, replaced by light, airy linen. The stuffy classical music was replaced by soft jazz. The staff didn't look terrified anymore. They looked happy. He walked inside. The hostess station was empty, but he saw her. Emma was sitting at table 4. The same table. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a sharp, tailored white suit that made her look powerful, yet elegant. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a faint yellow shadow. She was eating lunch. A burger. Julian approached the table. He felt small. He felt dirty. Sit, Emma said, not looking up from her fries. Julian sat in the chair he had once kicked. Emma. Miss Vance. Emma is fine, she said, wiping her mouth with a napkin. She looked at him. Her eyes were clear. There was no fear in them. How are you, Julian? How am I? Julian let out a bitter laugh. I'm ruined. I'm living in a studio apartment in Jersey. I take the bus. I have $400 in my bank account. You destroyed me. You destroyed yourself, Emma corrected him gently. I just handed you the shovel. She pushed a document across the table. What is this? Julian asked. The settlement, Emma said. I'm dropping the lawsuit. I don't want your money. I don't want to drag this out in court. Julian looked at the paper. It was a simple waiver. He reached for a pen. Fine, I'll sign it. And then I never want to see you again. There is a condition, Emma said. Julian froze. What? Read paragraph 4. Julian looked down. The defendant agrees to complete 500 hours of community service at a location designated by the plaintiff. I'm already doing community service for the state, Julian argued, picking up trash on the highway. This is different, Emma said. This is for me. If you want me to drop the civil suit, which seeks $10 million you don't have, you will agree to this. Julian gritted his teeth. He had no choice. If she sued him and won a judgment, they would garnish his wages for the rest of his life. He would never recover. Fine, he spat. He signed the paper aggressively. Where is the service? A soup kitchen? An animal shelter? Emma smiled. It was the smile of someone who had learned the game and rewritten the rules. No, she said. Here. Julian looked around the restaurant. Here? At the Obsidian? Yes, Emma said. I bought the place. And we're short-staffed. She reached under the table and pulled out a bundle of fabric. She tossed it to him. It was an apron, a white, starched waiter's apron. You start tonight, Emma said, taking a bite of her burger. Table 7 needs water. And Julian? He stared at the apron, his face a mask of horror. Don't forget to pour from the right, she said. And if you break anything, it's coming out of your tips. Julian stood there, the apron in his hands. He looked at the door. He could leave. He could walk out and face bankruptcy, debt collectors, and a lifetime of legal battles. Or he could put on the apron. Slowly, painfully, the former billionaire, the king of Silicon Alley, tied the strings around his waist. He picked up the water pitcher. He walked toward table 7. Emma watched him go. She didn't gloat. She just finished her lunch, left a generous tip on the table for the staff, and walked out into the bright New York sunshine, ready to start her real life. 6 months later. New York City has a short memory for scandal, but it has a long memory for status. The Obsidian Club had changed. Under Emma's ownership, it was no longer just a place for the ultra-wealthy to flaunt their net worth. It had become a cultural hotspot, a place where artists, writers, and thinkers mixed with the old money. The dress code was relaxed, the menu was locally sourced, and the atmosphere was vibrant. But there was one attraction that still drew a specific crowd, one curiosity that the elite whispered about at cocktail parties. Is he still there? They would ask. Yes, others would answer. Table 7. He's always at table 7. Emma Vance sat in her office on the top floor of the Vance Enterprises Tower. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city that looked like a circuit board of lights. She wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. She was the director of philanthropy, managing a fund of $2 billion dedicated to legal aid for service workers and underprivileged families. She looked different. The shyness was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She wore her family name not as a shield, but as a tool to pry open doors for others. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus Sterling. Emma had fired Sterling, as promised, but she had rehired him 2 weeks later as a busboy, stripping him of his title and his power. She told him he could earn his way back up if he learned to treat his staff like human beings. Surprisingly, he had stayed. "Miss Vance?" Sterling's voice came through, sounding humble. "The shift is ending. There is a situation with the employee." "Julian?" Emma asked, signing a grant document. "Yes, a customer recognized him, a former competitor. He poured wine on Mr. Thorne, deliberately." Emma stopped writing. She sighed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Emma arrived at the Obsidian, the restaurant was closing. The chairs were being stacked. The lights were dimmed. She found Julian in the back alley by the loading dock. He was sitting on a milk crate, smoking a cheap cigarette. His apron was stained with red wine. He looked older than his 36 years. The shark-like veneer was gone, eroded by 6 months of saying, "Yes, sir," and "Right away, Mom," to people he used to consider insects. He didn't stand up when she approached. "You heard?" Julian asked, staring at the wet pavement. "I heard," Emma said. "Did you retaliate?" "No," Julian said, taking a drag. "I wiped it up. I apologized for being in the way of his wine glass. Then I brought him a fresh bottle on the house." Emma leaned against the brick wall. "You've changed, Julian." Julian laughed bitterly. "I haven't changed, Emma. I've just been broken. There's a difference." He flicked the cigarette away. "I used to think power was money. I thought if I had enough zeros in my bank account, I could reshape reality. But tonight, when that guy dumped a $200 Cabernet on me, I realized something." "What?" "That I did the same thing to you." Julian looked up at her. His eyes were tired, haunted. "I spilled champagne on you. I blamed you. I tried to destroy you. Tonight I was you." "That was the point," Emma said softly. "I know," Julian nodded. "The sentence is almost up. My community service hours. I have 40 hours left. Then I'm free." "What will you do?" Emma asked. Julian looked at his hands that used to code algorithms, now rough from carrying heavy trays and washing dishes. "I don't know. I can't go back to tech. My name is Poison. Maybe I'll move. Midwest. Somewhere nobody knows who Julian Thorne was." Emma reached into her purse. She pulled out an envelope. "My father wanted me to give you this," she said. Julian took it suspiciously. He opened it. Inside was a check. It wasn't for millions. It was for 50,000 tolózolos. And a letter. "Read it," Emma said. Julian unfolded the letter. It was handwritten in Magnus Vance's blocky script. "Thorne, a man who never falls, never learns how to stand up. You have served your time. You have eaten your pride. This is seed money, not a handout, a loan, at 5% interest. If you start a company that actually helps people instead of exploiting them, I might be inclined to invest in round 2. Don't make me regret this. MV." Julian stared at the check. His hands shook. Tears pooled in his eyes, not tears of rage this time, but of relief. "Why?" Julian whispered. "After everything I did?" "Because my father believes in investments," Emma said, pushing off the wall. "And he thinks that maybe, just maybe, you've finally become a human being worth investing in." She turned to leave. "Finish your shift, Julian. Then go build something real." Emma walked away down the alley, the sound of the city humming around her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had learned that the best way to defeat a monster isn't to kill him, it's to teach him how to be a man. Julian sat alone on the crate for a long time. He looked at the check. He looked at the dirty apron. Slowly, he untied the apron and folded it neatly. He stood up, took a deep breath of the cool night air, and walked out of the alley. The billionaire who slapped a waitress was dead. The man who walked into the night was just starting to live. And that is the story of Julian Thorne and Emma Vance. It's a brutal reminder that in the game of life, the pieces can switch places in an instant. Julian thought his wealth made him a god, but he forgot that character is the only currency that matters when the bank accounts hit zero. He had to lose everything to find the humanity he threw away. So what do you think? Did Julian deserve a second chance at the end, or should Emma have left him to rot? If you were in Emma's shoes, would you have forgiven him? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, or if you believe that karma always comes back around, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want more stories about justice, revenge, and the twisted lives of the rich and powerful, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on today, because they might be the one holding the ladder tomorrow. See you in the next one.